Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And my name is Michael McDonald. I have the honor of being president of the Pennsylvania Bar Association. And I want to welcome you to our celebration of Law Day 2024, a celebration occurring throughout the length and breadth of our great country, a celebration of this year's Voices of Democracy. Now, there are so many notables in the room that it would take the entire program to list you all, but I do want to acknowledge the presence of one, and that is our Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justice Dan McCaffrey. And thank you very much. You honor us with your presence. And speaking of honor, it is my extreme honor and pleasure to welcome all of you to Pennsylvania, the cradle of democracy and freedom, and to our very special ABA Law Day event, co-sponsored by the American Bar Association, Division of Public Education, the Pennsylvania Bar Association, and the Philadelphia Bar Association. Our program today, so timely and appropriately titled, is Taking the Next Step, Ensuring Trusted Elections and Civics for Pennsylvanians.
And good afternoon. My name is Jen Coatsworth, and it's my honor and privilege to serve as the 2024 Chancellor of the Philadelphia Bar Association, and to welcome you to this innovative and exciting event. The brainchild of ABA President Mary Smith and her Task Force on American Democracy, our program today has as its goal to facilitate an open discussion on how election administration efforts are going and how to ensure that all votes are counted and how to improve the public's trust in the fairness and accuracy of election outcomes. It was a mere 6 blocks from here, where you are sitting today, that Elizabeth Willig Powell stood outside the Pennsylvania State House on September 17th, 1787, and asked Ben Franklin, "Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy?" "A republic if you can keep it," was Ben Franklin's famous reply. Today, we continue the timeless and critical effort to keep that republic and the promise of a more perfect union through the rule of law. And now I'd like to welcome 2 individuals who are true champions and relentless advocates for the rule of law in their stellar careers. Judge James J. Eisenhower of the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas and Matthew Archer-Beck, Senior Adjudication Counsel in the Office of General Counsel of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission and Chair of ABA Law Day. First, a few words about Judge Eisenhower. He currently sits as a judge in the Pennsylvania 1st Judicial District Court of Common Pleas here in Philadelphia. He was previously the president judge of the Pennsylvania Court of Judicial Discipline. And before that, he was of counsel at the Philadelphia law firm of Dilworth Paxson. His practice centered around white-collar criminal defense, internal investigations, compliance, ethics, and campaign finance matters. He served as a former federal prosecutor with more than 30 years' experience in government and private practice, focusing on white-collar and criminal defense, internal investigations, and compliance advice. He was also a White House Fellow in the administration of President Bill Clinton, where he served on the National Security Council staff. Judge Eisenhower also served as an assistant United States attorney in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, where he prosecuted cases of police and political corruption, narcotics and weapons offensives, and insurance fraud. He was awarded the Attorney General's Commendation for Sustained Superior Performance of Duty. So please help me welcome Judge Eisenhower. While he takes the stage, I'd also like to say a few words about Matthew Archer-Beck, who is the Senior Adjudication Counsel in the United States Securities and Exchange Commission's Office of the General Counsel. Before joining the SEC, Mr. Archer-Beck worked as a litigation attorney in a large law firm in Washington, D.C., and he served as a law clerk to judges on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit and the U.S. District Court for the District of California, the Central District of California. He is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and is currently the president of the National Native American Bar Association. He is also an active member of the American Bar Association, currently serving as the National Law Day Chair, as special advisor to the ABA's Commission on Racial and Ethnic Diversity in the Profession, and as secretary of the ABA's Government and Public Sector Lawyers Division. He currently lives in Northern Virginia, and we're very honored that he came up to join us today. Please help me welcome Matt Archer-Beck as well.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, for that very kind introduction. Most of it was true. I'd like to thank the Philadelphia Bar Association, the Pennsylvania Bar Association, and the ABA for co-sponsoring this event and for inviting me to speak to you today. I'm also grateful to the National Constitution Center for providing such a fantastic venue. Mr. Justice, Your Honor, Mr. Secretary, and distinguished guests. As my famous relative Dwight David Eisenhower once said, an intellectual is a man who takes more words than necessary to tell more than he knows. I will endeavor to avoid this. Today, we celebrate Law Day. On the observance of the very first Law Day, President Eisenhower said, "The world no longer has a choice between force and law. If civilization is to survive, it must choose the rule of law." Eisenhower's view was shaped by his witnessing firsthand what happens when the rule of law breaks down. In April 1945, as Allied armies under his command swept through France and into Nazi Germany, Eisenhower received an urgent message from General George Patton as the Third Army entered the town of Gotha in central Germany. General Patton had just liberated the Ohrdruf concentration camp and seen the horrors of Nazi crimes against the Jews and other victims. He urged General Eisenhower to come at once. On April 12, 1945, Generals Eisenhower, Bradley, and Patton toured the camp. What they saw there was so horrific, it caused Eisenhower to say, "I have never felt able to describe my emotional reactions when I came face to face with the indisputable evidence of Nazi brutality and ruthless disregard of every shred of decency. I have never at any time experienced an equal sense of shock." Eisenhower subsequently wrote to General Marshall in Washington saying, "The visual evidence and the verbal testimony of starvation, cruelty, and bestiality were so overpowering as to leave me sick." Following the visit, General Eisenhower ordered all American troops in the area not engaged in frontline battle to be sent to the Ohrdruf concentration camp. He ordered film crews and photographic units to capture the brutality, quote, "so that it could never be denied." General Eisenhower also requested members of Congress and journalists be sent to other liberated concentration camps to witness and document the horrific scenes Allied troops were uncovering. The atrocities of the Nazi regime that Eisenhower witnessed were facilitated by Hitler's attack on the German legal system and the rule of law. As early as March 1933, just months after he was elected Chancellor of Germany, Hitler began this assault by barring Jewish lawyers and judges, corrupting due process, and compromising the independence of the judiciary. Judges were selected by the Nazi Party and did not enforce the law, but rather Nazi racist doctrine. As World War II ended, the Cold War began, and the Soviet Union began its ruthless occupation of Eastern Europe and its quest to spread the communist system through the world. As Premier Khrushchev once boasted, "We will bury you." The Soviet Union embraced the May 1st holiday as, quote, International Workers' Day. Soviet leaders believed this would encourage workers in Europe, America, and throughout the world to unite against capitalism. May Day became a significant holiday in the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc, and in other communist countries such as Cuba. It was celebrated with high-profile parades showcasing Soviet military strength. President Eisenhower understood that the Soviet system significantly curbed the rule of law, civil liberties, protection of law, and due process. The Soviet Union's predominant legal theorists considered these examples of, quote, bourgeois morality. And Vladimir Lenin once explained the purpose and role of courts was not to eliminate terror, but to substantiate it and legitimize it in principle. Eisenhower recognized the disastrous effects of this disregard for the rule of law. When white mobs in Little Rock, Arkansas rioted to prevent black students from attending school in defiance of the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision, Eisenhower sent in the 101st Airborne to enforce the law. He explained that, quote, demagogic extremists and, quote, disorderly mobs, end quote, were thwarting the law, and he had a responsibility to respond. He said, quote, mob rule cannot be allowed to override the decisions of our courts. Eisenhower believed that instead of celebrating the communist disregard for the rule of law on May 1st, May 1st instead should celebrate the rule of law. On May 1st, 1958, he proclaimed the first law day as president. He stated, quote, the reason is to remind us all that we as Americans live every day of our lives under the rule of law. The rule of law does more than ensure freedom from high-handed actions by rulers. It ensures justice between each of us, however humble the one and however powerful the other. In these trying times, when the rule of law is threatened around the globe, and even here at home, we do well to remember Eisenhower's words on that first law day, quote, we honor not only the principle of the rule of law, but also those judges, legislators, lawyers, and law-abiding citizens who actively work to preserve our liberties under law. Let history record, he said, that on Law Day, a free people's faith in the rule of law and justice is greater than ever before. And let us trust that this faith will be vindicated for the benefit of all humankind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Eisenhower, for that important context about the history of Law Day. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Archer-Beck. As Jen mentioned, I am the ABA 2024 National Law Day Chair. I'm also the president of the National Native American Bar Association. In 1787, a few blocks from here, this country took a bold step toward establishing an enduring democratic republic. The so-called Miracle at Philadelphia brought forth our national charter, the federal constitution that still serves as the legal framework and fundamental law of our country. The three words that begin the Constitution are commonplace but profound. We the people. As Professor Akil Reed Amar remarked in his book, America's Constitution, a Biography, quote, with simple words placed in the document's most prominent location, the preamble laid the foundation for all that followed. So the implication from the start of both the document and the government it would establish was clear. In the words of Alexander Hamilton, here, sir, the people govern. This concept of popular sovereignty in the United States was perhaps most eloquently expressed by Abraham Lincoln during a time when the survival of our republic was under one of its greatest threats. In the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln noted the unfinished work of our country to live up to its founding principles, and he urged greater resolve to ensure, quote, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. This year's Law Day theme is Voices of Democracy. Central to this theme is the idea that we, the people, govern, and the related recognition that in our democracy, the people's voices matter. In college, I sang bass in my school's concert choir. In a choir, many different voices come together to produce a rich and resonant sound that no individual voice could alone achieve. Different vocal parts sing different notes, but together they can produce a unifying harmony. Thus, in a choir, the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts. The analogy holds true for our democracy. For it to be its best, we need a variety of different voices coming together. Now, I recognize that the voices in our democracy might not be completely in harmony. And in fact, we might not be singing from the same hymn sheet or even the same song. But although we may not yet have reached it, we are still striving to achieve that more perfect union spoken of in the Constitution's preamble, to create something like harmony out of discordant voices. To reach or even approach that ideal, we need common ground. The purpose of Law Day is in part to remind ourselves of the fundamental principles that undergird our democracy and with which we should all agree, such as the rule of law and other cornerstones of democracy, like the 3 C's of last year's Law Day theme: civics, civility, and collaboration. Putting those principles into practice is one way that we make our voices heard in our democracy. In other words, we can raise our voices through collaborative civic engagement by becoming involved in and speaking out on issues of importance to us and our communities, from where to put a pickleball court, to how to reduce the federal deficit, to the very topic of how best to protect our democratic institutions. And lawyers play a special role in these conversations and debates. They provide not only expertise about what the law is, but importantly, they can and must raise their voices in support of the rule of law itself. Because many of the decisions on the issues we care about are mediated through our elected representatives, one of the most important ways that we make our voices heard in our country is through the ballot box. Recognizing and protecting the voices of democracy, therefore, requires not only a commitment to principles of civility and free speech, but also ensuring the free and fair administration of our elections, so citizens can be confident that when they raise their voice through their vote, that it will be counted. An important part of today's discussion will be about assuring voters that they can trust the integrity of our election systems. To me, the Voices of Democracy theme is not just about raising our voices, but also about listening to the voices of others. For too long, the voices of many in our society have been systematically excluded and marginalized. As we celebrate the voices of democracy, it is vital that we recognize and listen to the voices of historically underrepresented people and communities. We have so much to learn from the diverse backgrounds and experience of others. Another important aspect of listening to the voices of democracy is accepting the results of free and fair elections. Under the rule of law in our country, disputes about the fairness of elections can be reviewed by the courts, and once any appeals are exhausted, we abide by those decisions without resorting to violence or extra legal means to undermine them. In a democratic society, we will always have the opportunity to make our voices heard in the next election. Given the importance of listening to the voices of democracy, it is altogether fitting and proper that the ABA's Task Force for American Democracy should be here today on Law Day in Pennsylvania, conducting one of its stops on its nationwide listening tour. As you will see, the task force is engaged in important work of helping to shore up our democracy at this critical time when it is facing unprecedented challenges. But the task force work is not its alone. It is all of our work. And although listening is important, we must not be content to merely listen to the engaging speakers and presentations today, but we must also commit ourselves to raising our voices in our communities and taking the necessary actions, the next step, to together ensure that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. Thank you. I'd like now to introduce my friend and mentor, the current president of the American Bar Association, and the first Native American woman to lead that association, Mary Smith.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here. I learned that today is the first in-person Law Day event that the American Bar Association has had since 2019, since before the pandemic. And there's no more fitting place to do that than here in Philadelphia. I am so thankful to the host committee, the Pennsylvania Bar, the Philadelphia Bar, and all the rest of the Philadelphia and Pennsylvania legal community for all your work in putting this together. Thank you, Mr. Justice. Thank you, Judge Eisenhower, and all our other distinguished guests. It is such a thrilling event to be here where our democracy was formed. As Matt mentioned, the theme of this year's Law Day is Voices of Democracy, and I think that really encapsulates what democracy is all about, that everyone has a voice, whether they're harmonious, discordant, or eventually coming together. And as Matt mentioned, I am Native American. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and it was particularly fitting for me to choose Matt, who I think the world of, as he is also the first Native American to be Law Day chair. So thank you, Matt. And I'd also like to acknowledge Alpha Brady, the executive director of the American Bar Association. Thank you. So when I was thinking about my term as president of the American Bar Association, I was thinking, what should we focus on? What is really important for lawyers to focus on? And I kept coming back to what I think, and I think all of you here today, is the single most important issue facing our country today, and that's threats to our democracy. And the facts are sobering. 1 in 6 adults cannot name any branch of government. Less than 1/3 of millennials consider it essential to live in a democracy. That one really jars me every time I hear it. About 38% of Americans support authoritarianism as a response to the direction of democracy in the United States, and nearly a quarter say they are prepared to resort to violence if their desired candidate loses. As these statistics indicate, we're living in a time where a lack of basic civics knowledge, let alone how a democratic form of government differs from an autocracy, has weakened our democracy, threatened the rule of law, and put the possibility of politically motivated violence on our radar screens. Last week, the American Bar Association launched its 6th annual survey of civic literacy, and there's a few statistics that are particularly noteworthy. An eye-opening 74% say America's system of democracy is weaker than it was 5 years ago. And the main cause they cite, it's the downward spiral, is the spread of misinformation and disinformation. And there was one question asked, who is responsible for safeguarding democracy? Well, a quarter believed it's the judiciary's responsibility. Only 1 in 5 said it was duty of public officials. And the largest group, 37%, believe that the public is primarily responsible for safeguarding democracy. Now, whether you're an optimistic person or a pessimistic person, if you're pessimistic, you say, oh my gosh, only 20% think that the officials that we have elected are responsible for protecting democracy. But then if you're an optimistic person, the biggest group said what I think is the right answer. All of us are responsible for safeguarding democracy. So in that vein, I created the Task Force for American Democracy, and I could not have thought of two better co-chairs, Secretary Johnson and Judge Luttig, and I'm so glad that Jerry Goldfeder, another member of the task force, is here today. And they have been doing amazing work around the country hosting listening tours. So this is a very special Law Day / listening tour in Pennsylvania, and we are thrilled to be here. So without further ado, you are about to hear a very special conversation on the state of civics and democracy in our country with Secretary Johnson, Judge Luttig, moderated by Dean Mark Alexander of Villanova School of Law. So thank you.
Thank you. Wow, there we go. It is
Hello.
on.
I like your taste in shoes.
Thank you. I like yours. We've got a nice, well-dressed panel here. It is certainly a thrill to be here. It's an honor for me. In my life as a professor, I'm also a common law professor, and indeed my favorite part of the Constitution is the preamble, where we speak about forming a more perfect union. That's the joy of being a professor. I see one of my colleagues here too. We have favorite parts of constitutions and things like that. And it is an honor for me when I was asked if I could moderate this conversation between Judge Luttig and Secretary Johnson to be with the two of them. And their bios are in the materials. They need no introduction, but I think what's important is they have such distinguished careers in public service, and at this point, they're doing such an extraordinary public service in leading this task force, and that's why, for me, it was such an honor to be asked to be part of the conversation. We have 35 minutes to discuss the small topic of civility in discourse and democracy. So what we'll do is we'll just have a few questions and explore some of the work that you're doing currently and some of your perspectives on where we are going as a country. And so I wanted just to start with the ABA, and you were asked last summer to lead this national task force to recommend ways to restore public trust in our American democracy. And so the two-part question is, why'd you do it? And what have you learned so far? Just a couple of quick takeaways that you have at this moment.
Would you like to go first? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be back in Philadelphia with my good friend, Mark Alexander, who I've known for decades, and one of my heroes, Judge Michael Luttig. Just before this program started, he wanted to show me the First Amendment enshrined on the wall here, the wording. He put it there. He paid to have that put there. And you'll see a plaque memorializing that there. And we talked about the First Amendment. And what struck me about the First Amendment is just 45 words with 2 commas and a semicolon. But it enshrines such a powerful part of our democracy. And I said to Judge Luttig, you could never write such a huge part of our democracy, our Constitution, in just 45 words today, because there'd be so much distrust, it would quickly turn into 45,000 words, which reflects, I think, another part of our history, which is so much of our Constitution, our constitutional norms and our democracy is gray. There's a lot of gray and some ambiguity in it. And it assumes that people of goodwill who respect the Constitution and respect constitutional norms will lead our government and do so in an honorable way. For example, being big enough to concede an election, even when there's doubt about it, for the sake of the integrity of our democracy. I said yes to this assignment when Mary asked me, because I have such immense respect for Judge Luttig, who was the other co-chair. I had to say yes. And I consider this a very critical part of my post-government life. And because our democracy is, we've learned our democracy is frail. It is fragile. We used to like to talk about how we're the most enduring democracy on earth. We always have peaceful and orderly transfers of power. That's not true. We learned that's not true anymore. And I've been pleased and reassured when we have these listening tours, and we've done a couple of these now in Georgia, Michigan. Today, we're going to do one in Wisconsin. Hopefully, I think we're going to do one in Arizona. That the level of interest in keeping our democracy and volunteering for this effort on a large scale. I think the challenge we have is, in a gathering like this, I'd love to see younger people interested in this. Everybody here is about, maybe a little bit younger than me, or, maybe 20 years younger than me, but college-age people who are worried about the future of their democracy. So I think our challenge is to get college-age, law school-age people out, because they realize, too, that our democracy is at stake. Those are my initial thoughts.
Judge? Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Jay. As I was reflecting out in the great hall there before we came in, it occurred to me that this is a high honor for the Secretary and I, but for all of us, to be celebrating Law Day on this stage at the nation's Constitution Center in Philadelphia, just steps away from Independence Hall, where both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution itself were debated and written. That's awe-inspiring, and it should be awe-inspiring to all of us. It's also fitting and appropriate, as was said, that we be having this Law Day celebration here in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center this year in particular. I'm no historian, but I'm quite confident that this is the most important law day in American history, even if Law Day had been conceived in 1787 or 1789, for reasons that are obvious to all of us. For the first time in American history, since the founding almost 250 years ago, America's democracy itself and its rule of law are under withering assault. Millions and millions of Americans today, for the first time ever, question, as Mary pointed out, whether America should even be a democracy. And with that, whether America should be governed by the rule of law. Those statistics that Mary read were astonishing, dismaying, and sobering. I mean, millions of Americans are questioning whether democracy is the best form of government for this nation to live under for the first time ever. So Mary gets all the credit in the world for establishing the ABA's task force on American democracy at this moment, because there's nothing more important to America at this moment than its democracy and rule of law. And it was appropriate that the American Bar Association create this particular task force, because lawyers have a special obligation. They take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law. There are not that many people in our society who actually take an oath to do so, but we in the legal profession do. And we have a profound obligation in the profession today to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law. It's, in many ways, we are supposed to lead the country in the defense of the Constitution and rule of law. We are the guardians, if you will, of the Constitution and rule of law. As Judge Eisenhower, explained or reminded us. And the country needs us right now to do just that, Dean.
So building on that and thinking about your comments and the First Amendment, how do you see the role of civil discourse, which is under such great stress in our country today? What do you see for how it helps preserve and protect our system, and what is it that we as lawyers can do, in addition to we as citizens can do to protect that?
So it's my view, and I said this in a speech I gave last week, University of Chicago. I think in any movement, either backwards or forwards, you have a core group of protagonists, and then you have a much larger group of enablers, either because they're apathetic, they don't care, they're afraid, or they see something in it for themselves, like a tax cut or lower interest rates. Well, I don't really like his tweets, but I like his policies, that kind of thing. And I think the key to strengthening our democracy are the enablers, which is why I have been outspoken in my belief that in order to restore and strengthen our democracy, we need to reform the way in which we elect members of Congress in two significant ways. One, redistricting. Our legislative redistricting is, and I don't mean to offend any legislators that happen to be in the room here, but it's rigged, where the politicians pick their voters and not the other way around. And we end up with a situation where you have 400 out of 435 House seats that are considered safe. And you end up with a situation where Congress has a 20% approval rating, but 90% of them get rehired every 2 years. How does that happen? It happens because we have so many safe seats such that the incumbent or the candidate never has to appeal to the broader spectrum of the electorate. If you're a Democrat, you're looking over your left shoulder at the extreme left primary challenge, and if you're a Republican, you're looking over your right shoulder from the extreme right, and they have to play to those bases. So political compromise is a dirty word, but political compromise is the essence of governing. It's the essence of how you get stuff done. You know, if he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat, and we need to pass a budget every year, we compromise on his priorities, my priorities, in order to get it to the president's desk. Rather, we have a system now where it is more politically advantageous for me to stand back, disagree with anything he wants to do, call him evil, and go raise money off of it. And I don't particularly care about whether or not the federal government gets a budget. And the same is true for him. That's the incentive system that exists right now in our politics, particularly in Washington. I have been, as part of this task force, I have been pleased to discover that there are a number of states, including Ohio and Michigan, that have embarked on citizen commissions to redraw district lines. Rather than have politicians do it, have citizens do it in a bipartisan, neutral way. I also think that open, nonpartisan primaries are a good idea, like we have in California, and I think in Alaska now, because both of those reforms encourage the election of people who are incentivized to appeal to a broader cross-section of their constituents. And Mark, you're an election law expert. I'm sure you're well acquainted with these reforms and what I think are the virtues of going in that direction.
Thank you.
Dean, civil discourse is essential for democracy. It's the, as we lawyers would say, it's the sine qua non of democracy. Without which you cannot have democracy. And the founding fathers and the framers of our Constitution understood that above all else. They feared the demagoguery that plagues our public discourse today. In their minds and in their words, actually, they feared that demagogues among our public officials would play on the passions of the populace and cause them to abandon reasoned discourse and reasoned decision-making as to the future of the nation. In fact, you know, from my reading, the founding fathers and the framers feared a demagogue in the presidency more than anything else. And so fast forward almost 250 years, what do we have today? We've been told by our public officials that we are enemies of each other. Enemies of each other. And as a consequence, they and we the people talk to each other in, you know, vile accusations and vile commentary. As Jay said, you know, we don't listen to each other at all, and we treat each other as enemies when in fact we're not enemies of each other. We've never been enemies of each other, and in fact we're friends, neighbors, family, who share the same hopes and the same dreams for America. But until we break this poisonous cycle, then there's literally no hope for democracy.
Well, that's a cheery note there. No hope for democracy, but let's think about. No, I think, but I think it's.
Mark, if I could
think it's
just supplement that
serious.
answer.
Yeah, please.
About civil discourse. Whenever I meet somebody in a setting like this, for example, first thing that runs through my mind, there was a common motive for us being together in the same room. So that we have in common. And before I even have any sense of that person's politics, I'll always look for other things we have in common, like where are you from, where'd you grow up, where'd you go to school, where do you live? Find common ground. Oh, well, my cousin was in the same law firm, or one of my best friends went to the same law school, 2 classes behind you. You establish that common ground before you get into the areas that you know you're going to disagree on. And then, if we're all intelligent, rational people, when we have Michael and I, every year we go to this thing called the National Constitution Center, where you've got people across the political spectrum who debate various issues. And I'll sit and I'll listen to someone who's on the other end of the political spectrum from me, who's bright, and I'll think, wow, I hadn't considered that before. Maybe I should re-examine my own belief, or I have considered that before, I still disagree with it, and my convictions are stronger as a result. So.
Well, that actually was answering my next question in large part. And I think in that context, part of the setup, and I want to turn to the judge too, in talking about enemies, when we first saw each other today, we started catching up. And his daughter, Natalie, and my daughter, Maya, were babies who played together. And that was the first part of our conversation. We would have conversations, we'd agree on things and disagree on things. But finding that is, I think, the question is, how do we find the way? And often finding those points of common ground, because, you know, we often are parents, and we have our own parents and siblings and friends. But I was going to build on the point, I want to ask you, Judge, on the bench, you had such a distinguished career, where, you know, specifically while you are appointed by a certain president, and then confirmed by certain members of the Senate, but you know, you put on the robe, and it's a different nature of partisanship. How did you find it most effective for you to build bridges when you had colleagues with whom you disagreed, when you're trying to sort out a case?
You know, and I love that questioning for this reason. You know, I believe that, and I've always believed that you should interact with every person that you meet by first opening yourself up and exposing yourself vulnerably, if you will, to that person. My dad taught me that. In fact, it's you know, he used to say, as to love, you know, it's better to have loved and been pained than not to have loved at all. And so also in all relationships. But on the bench, I tried to model that in this way. Whenever a colleague disagreed with me and he with me over an important issue, I wouldn't write a memo, which is what, to be honest with you, most judges do. I just go down, you know, open the door and walk in and say, hey, Joe, you got time to talk about this case? And without exception, my colleague would say, sure, come on in. And I'd say, listen, you know, neither one of us believes exactly what we've written. I said, and it disserves our positions and the country for us to release these opinions as they are. So let's just, you know, what do you really want to say here, and what do I really want to say here? And then we would just open up a conversation. And invariably, our opinions would change, you know, and they would come closer together. That's the product, without any question, of civil discourse. And again, it's the lawyers in our society who are trained in civil discourse. If you want to put it this way, we have no choice. When you walk into a court of the United States, it's not an option to talk to the court or to your adversary in the way that we Americans speak to each other every day. And of course, you can't talk to each other the way politicians talk to each other and the way the politicians talk to us, right? You know, you'd proverbially get thrown out of court for good reason. But what is that all about? It's not simply for the decorum and respect of the court and of the law. It's in order to ensure reasonable civil discourse so that you can join issue on the issues and decide them together. And that's what we need, that's what we need today in America more than anything else. When I testified in Congress a couple of years ago, I went ahead to propose a solution for what we are about in America today. And I said, all it would really take is a small nucleus of bipartisan politicians to stand up and to say to America, this is not who we are. We need to change. Now, with everything else I've ever said in life, no one ever listened to me, apparently, and not one politician in the 2 years since I said that has moved 1 inch from where he or she was the day I said that.
Well, let me follow on that. So now we have today, Law Day 2024, your exact challenge. How can we make progress on that? I hear you say that, and I'm inspired. So how do we, and all of us in this room, and I guess we're live streamed, and how can we help make that happen? Because it's to me so compelling. So it might not have worked then, but what can we do now?
Dean, this is not I can't do any more than this, but I just, not long before I came in here today, I finished a statement on the rule of law. And it had, it has 15 or 20 planks, if you will. And one of them is that we would pledge to hold our public officials accountable for the defense, protection, and support of the Constitution and the rule of law. So what does that mean? It means all of us, we the people, telling our politicians, stop. Stop it. You're ruining our America with this kind of talk toward each other. You have a responsibility, a high responsibility under the Constitution and to us, the people, to support the Constitution and the rule of law and quit acting like, you could care less. That's what I would say and what I would say to their faces if I had the opportunity.
Okay.
So,
and then build on that, and particularly build on that in light of your comments about gerrymandering, redistricting, and the current state of politics.
So first impressions are often unshakable. And the first person I ever worked for in a job where I got paid, the first person I ever worked for was my dad, washing dishes in his office. But the second person I worked for was my congressman from the Hudson Valley in New York. His name was Hamilton Fish. He was the fourth generation Hamilton Fish in Congress. Republican blue blood. His great-grandfather was Ulysses Grant's Secretary of State. He was a true Lincoln Republican. And he was soft-spoken, didn't seek the limelight, voted pretty much the party line on economic issues, tax cuts, that kind of thing. But if you walk into his office, in the Rayburn House office building, he had this gavel in a glass case on the wall. And it was a gavel given to him by Peter Rodino, who was chairman of House Judiciary, a Democrat, because Ham had voted for Richard Nixon's impeachment. Because as an American, as a public servant, as a lawyer, he recognized that his higher duty, rather than to his party, was to the Constitution. And he felt obliged to vote for Nixon's impeachment, though his father, Hamilton Fish III, didn't speak to him for a year. And that was my first impression of a public servant. And I still believe that. I still believe, and this is such a simple, basic proposition. I don't know why we even have to debate it. Your obligation to the Constitution, your oath to the Constitution, is higher than any loyalty you have to your party, to your president, to your speaker. The judge who administered the oath to me when I became Secretary of Homeland Security said, "You're about to take an oath to the Constitution. You're not taking an oath to Homeland Security." And that always stayed with me.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jay. And it can be summed up in this way. Our politicians need to put our country ahead of their parties. And at this moment, by my observation, precious few of them do that. And until more do, we're going to languish.
So time is flying, but I want to take just a few minutes just to talk about January 6th, a small topic there. And particularly in the context that we are here with the ABA. So particularly we see a lot of lawyers all around, let's say, in the activities before, during, and after January 6th. Some covered themselves in glory, and some in much less than that. What lessons might you draw specifically from the lawyers that we have seen in January 6th in the context of the insurrection and the lawsuits, the indictments that have come? You can sort of pick any particular angle you want. But how do you see our lawyers helping and hurting our democracy in this context?
This pitch is meant for him.
Yeah. So the first line of my congressional testimony was something to the effect that on January 6, 2021, a stake was driven through the heart of American democracy. And today, America's democracy is on a knife's edge. That was 2 years ago. If I could come up with the words, and I'm not sure I could, I would say that with even greater force today than I did 2 years ago. That's how perilous these times are for America's democracy and the rule of law. Lawyers, as we all know, were central to the former president's attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, remain in power, preventing the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in American history. In fact, one of my lawyers is said to have been the architect of that legal plan to overturn the election. This is beyond disappointing to me. But to the Dean's question, I doubt that January 6th would have ever occurred had it not been for the enabling of that effort by lawyers of the legal profession, and they were some of the finest lawyers and constitutional lawyers in the country. So where did they go wrong? Well, we could spend the whole afternoon on that, but what I said to Congress was this. I said, these lawyers lacked the judgment necessary at this most important moment in American history. What did I mean by this? There is no lawyer in this world who should have tried to lawyer this issue. As we lawyers know, we think we can come up with a technical legal answer to anything. We have a higher responsibility than that, and the lawyers certainly had a higher responsibility in that moment in American history. And instead, what did they do? They tried to technical law to support the President of the United States in overturning an election that he had lost fair and square. That was indefensible and inexcusable. We need a lot of work in the legal profession. We need to remind lawyers that a technical legal answer really is never the answer, but it's certainly never the answer when you're in public service to the United States of America.
That is wonderful. I would say in our last minute we've got, I want to just build on that and ask you each to very briefly, maybe it's doing me a favor, but I think it builds on the earlier point about young people. If you could spend a minute talking to my students at Villanova Law and every other law student around the country, what is that advice you give to them today, looking forward into their careers? In this specific context, in 30 seconds or less.
Well, I'm an optimist. We've had challenges in our democracy before, and we've always managed to survive. I take the long view of our democracy, and it is the most enduring democracy. It's fragile. There are some people who want to push that envelope, but I do believe it will survive. But it also depends on what we do in moments like this to protect it.
You know, I'm asked every day, you know, where do I find hope? And most days it's hard, but every day I say, in answer to that question, I find hope in the American people. I believe to my core that the American people believe in America, they believe in our democracy, they believe in our Constitution, and they believe in our rule of law. Never before have we ever been, we never thought that we would even be called upon to stand and defend America, her democracy, her Constitution, and the rule of law. It never crossed our minds. And, you know, we lawyers, we take that oath every day, millions and millions and millions of us at this point. It never crosses our mind. Let alone has it ever crossed our mind that it would take courage to stand up and defend our country and our rule of law. But that moment has arrived, and if we don't answer that call as lawyers, but also as Americans, then we're going to look up one day and find out that we no longer have a democracy. We no longer have the rule of law.
Well, I would say on that note is a call to courage, a call to action, a call to our optimism, and a call ultimately to engage in our system and to make ours a more perfect union tomorrow. So I am truly grateful that these truly dedicated servants, public servants, have joined us. So a big Philly welcome and thank you.
I'm not sure about you, but I have a chill down my spine just listening to those dissertation on democracy. And I just want to say thank you to you. You are giants of the profession, and you have shown a passion that we can only hope to share with all of our people here in Pennsylvania and throughout the country. So thank you very much. We're going to take a 10-minute break now, 10-minute. Please be back in your seats within 10 minutes because we are live streaming. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Pennsylvania is very fortunate to have our next presenter serving as our fearless leader for the 2024 election cycle. He possesses a unique combination of qualities: professional excellence, integrity, a passion for service, and actually some personal courage and a thick skin, and that will serve him very well in the weeks and months ahead. He has a very impressive and wide-ranging resume: graduate of Allegheny College, doctorate in history in Brandeis University, Philadelphia City Commissioner for 10 years, vice chairman of its Board of Elections, extensive work as a senior performance analyst at the nonpartisan U.S. Government Accountability Office, and most recently as president and CEO of the Committee of 70, a nonpartisan good government organization. He is a man made for this moment. Please join me in welcoming the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Al Schmidt.
That was extremely kind, and as my friends and family have told me my whole life, I don't take compliments well, and my first instinct is to argue against them. So I'll do that very briefly. There are a lot of people who did a lot in the 2020 election. With a little bit of perspective, I think it's clear to me that things held together because of the judiciary and the role of law played throughout that whole process. And we were very fortunate in the city of Philadelphia to be represented by some incredible attorneys. We had Ben Field, Mike Fouts, and Sean McGrath doing much of the work along with their whole team: Michelle Hangley, Rob Weigel, Mark Aronchek at Aronchek, DLA Piper, and obviously at the state level, Mike Fisher, Amy Thompson, and many others. They are really, in my opinion, some of the people who played the most important role in that election cycle. Because they did their job so well, we were able to focus on our job, the job that only election administrators can do, which is to count our voters' votes. I'd remind you there were also attorneys on the other side, who I would love to name as well, who sought to delay or prevent the certification of our election results and prevent our voters' votes from being counted. If I may, I'll just say a few words about the state of elections in Pennsylvania and the role of the Department of State. 8 days ago, Pennsylvania held, obviously, the 2024 presidential primary. I'm pleased that it was a very calm and successfully run election at the county level. Unfortunately, turnout was not what any of us would ever desire, which of course is for every eligible voter to register to vote and every registered voter to cast their vote and have their vote counted. Voters encountered an improved voting experience in Pennsylvania thanks to the hundreds of county election officials and the approximately 45,000 poll workers who make democracy happen on Election Day, who work more than probably 14 hours from beginning to end before the polls open until after the polls close. Because of them, Pennsylvanians were able to cast their vote by mail. There were more than cast a vote at more than 9,000 polling places in 67 counties. Our election directors counted or processed more than 900,000 applications for mail-in ballots, which is extraordinary. And as I know very well, it's really the counties that run elections in Pennsylvania, and we have a supporting role for them and to serve them at the Pennsylvania Department of State. County election directors administered the successful election despite the fact that many of them are new to this position. Since 2020, Pennsylvania has seen an unprecedented turnover in local election officials, and that increases the likelihood of errors occurring in an environment that is extremely unforgiving, and highly scrutinized. And it's gratifying to see so many people step up to serve in that important role. It's why the Department of State put together a new election directors program to try to provide the tools that new election directors need to run elections smoothly. So last year we created that program. In the months before the primary, we held 23 trainings on 11 different topics, and attendance ranged usually between 50 and 100 election administrators at the county level participating and sharing their experiences with one another, especially more experienced election directors with some of the newer ones. We've also taken some steps to improve the voter experience, ensuring that our elections are run freely and fairly and that every eligible voter can make their voice heard is a top priority for the Shapiro administration. Toward that end, the department redesigned our declaration envelope, our mail-in ballot materials, our instructions, and all the rest in an effort to minimize opportunities for voters to make fatal errors when completing their, executing the declaration envelope when submitting their mail-in ballot. Standardized instructions included other visual aids to assist with that. We'll be able, once all of the results, once the system is updated at the county level for the ultimate disposition of each declaration envelope, we'll be able to assess the success and to what degree we can do better in the future to prevent voters from making those fatal errors. As you know, there have been some court decisions in the Third Circuit, including one a day or two ago that unfortunately will result in voters not having their mail-in ballots counted in cases where the voter failed to date the ballot. And as any election administrator will tell you at the county level, the date is not used for any purpose whatsoever other than to check to make sure that it's dated. So that's extremely discouraging. So we have to do what we can. We also changed the envelope design and the appearance of the envelope to assist the U.S. Postal Service in identifying those ballots more easily and delivering them. We increased voter access significantly by implementing automatic voter registration in Pennsylvania last September on National Voter Registration Day. Now, Commonwealth residents obtaining new or renewed driver's licenses and ID cards at PennDOT service centers are eligible to automatically be registered to vote. They have the opportunity to opt out if they choose, but otherwise are opt into the process. As a result, we've seen a 45% increase in new applications to register to vote through PennDOT in the first 4 months of automatic voter registration compared to the same time 2 years ago. We've also added a number of languages and the instructions up to 31 different languages to improve voter access when completing the voter registration application process. We want to ensure every Pennsylvanian who is eligible and chooses to exercise their right to vote that we will assist them in whatever we can to make sure they can do so easily and successfully. In another effort to improve election administration, the Department of State implemented a new initiative earlier this year using the U.S. Postal Service's National Change of Address program. One thing that you hear a lot of complaints about when it comes to election administration or even from poll workers is the accuracy of voter rolls. People will see the list of voters who are registered to vote and realize some of them moved away years ago but are still there. Pennsylvania law does not allow, between Pennsylvania law and federal law, it doesn't allow those to be canceled unless the voter does not participate for essentially 7 years. 14 elections in a row you'd have to miss. So what we began doing at the Pennsylvania Department of State is use that list to send mailings to the address where postal records indicate the voter moved to. So if somebody moves from here to New York, we send them a letter saying our records indicate you've moved to New York. If you choose to cancel your voter registration in Pennsylvania, here's how you would do so. Because improving the integrity of the electoral process, I think, is really critical to improving confidence in it. We directly reached out to voters and provided that information to to make those rules more accurate. We're also enhancing election security. The Shapiro administration is committed to ensuring safe and secure elections in Pennsylvania, and part of that effort is ongoing, everyday, and continuous, year-round. It involves training and other strategic communications among public agencies and officials. We also work closely with other state, local, and federal partners. And in February, the Shapiro administration launched the Elections Threat Task Force. It's composed of federal, state, and local security, law enforcement, and election administration partners, including the FBI, Pennsylvania State Police, National Guard, Department of Homeland Security, and others. The task force, which I lead, meets regularly to share information and coordinates plans to mitigate against threats targeting voters or election administrators or the electoral process. And it helps improve communication by all of us meeting regularly so everyone knows what everyone else's role is. So when threats come about, and hopefully we won't see a return of any of the ugliness that we saw in 2020, but we had to scramble to some degree to figure out how best to deal with these threats. To whom should they be reported and who's responsible for doing what? So the Election Threats Task Force is designed to improve communication so that everyone knows what everyone else's role is. And again, so our election administrators can focus on their important role and voters can vote with confidence and without fear. Because we want Pennsylvanians to feel confident in our system, we also conducted 2 types of audits after every election. All 67 counties conduct it's called a 2% audit, or audit 2,000 of the votes that are cast to make sure that the tabulated results are accurate. The election code permits them to do that, or requires them to do that. And a second audit, which was introduced under previous Secretary Bukvar, which is a real advantage to the integrity, in strengthening the integrity of the process, is something called a risk limiting audit that also audits all election results to ensure that the tabulated election results prior to certification are accurate. It examines a random sample of ballots to make sure that voters can have confidence in that outcome. That process begins tomorrow morning. As a former local election official with 10 years of experience running elections here in Philadelphia, I've tried to take the job and make administering elections clearer and easier for county election directors to the extent that I can. I had 10 years complaining about the Pennsylvania Department of State, and many of those complaints were wrong. Department of State was frequently right in retrospect. But it is something of a put up or shut up moment. Either you're going to do what you can to improve election administration in Pennsylvania at the state level to the extent the Department of State has a role, or really have no point in being there. So it is something our team takes seriously, committed to not releasing any directives or guidance any closer than 45 days to the election, to make sure that voters and election administrators can prepare for the election in a thoughtful way without any last-minute changes, unless those are required by last-minute developments or court decisions or anything else like that. And all of you know, it might be wishful thinking on my part that the courts will make their decisions in compliance with the election calendar. Just again, lastly, the legal community has such an important role to play. I'm so grateful for that role. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here. Right when I moved to Philadelphia, one of the first things I did was actually come to an event here organized by the Committee of 70. And I sat right over there, and it was about getting involved in your city. And in the civic life all around you, and left here, decided to get involved and do that. A couple years later, ran for office, ran for city controller. I sat in that chair on the far left over there in 2009. So it is indeed intimidating and a real honor to be back with you, especially in this venue today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Make. I'm a reporter with NBC 10. I cover politics, so I see some of these folks in different situations. I've met some of them over Zoom, interviewing them. I have interviewed others of them, including the secretary who you just heard from in person. But today I'm here to moderate two discussions, and I'm going to introduce to you the first people that we will be hearing from. We are not sitting in this order, so please just raise your hand. raise your hand. Karen Barsoom is the Director of Voter Services for Chester County. Kathy Bookvar is former Secretary of the Commonwealth. And Omar Sabir is Chair of the Philadelphia City Commissioners. So let's start the conversation. Try to keep an eye on my time. All right, welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us. So let's start by talking about what it takes to put on an election. And I'm going to start with the folks at the county level because it really starts there. Let's start by talking about how many people it takes to put on an election and how early you start. Commissioner Sabir, we'll start with you.
So I would say upwards of Philadelphia, at least 10,000 people. But because you got about 8,500 poll workers, we have about 200 or so full-time staff. Then you have your part-time and seasonals. But then you have to look at the partnerships that you make with different departments. So you need the police department, sheriff's department, water department, office of emergency management. So, I mean, when I tell people, like, you really need the whole city really on board, really, for this. So I'll say the whole city of Philadelphia. But if you just look at that just from a logistical sense, I would say maybe about 10,000 or so people.
Karen, what stands out to you in terms of what it takes to get your staff ready for an election? Maybe talk about where we are right now in the process.
So right now, when I saw the schedule today, I was like, uh-oh, because we are in the middle of reconciliation. We were sworn in on Friday to start reconciliation and the Friday after election. And then we are looking at all the data, all the numbers, how many people went into the poll, how many people actually casted their ballots. So that is actually 21 days from election day is certification. That's in the statute. And so we have 3 weeks to make sure everything lines up and everything is accurate, as tight as we can get it. So I can actually advise the Board of Elections of all the numbers and the details so they are confident in certifying the election.
And as you are doing that, are you also starting the preparations for November at this point?
Yeah, so we actually never stop elections, even though it's twice a year. People think I work maybe twice a year, but that's not the case. So every day, everything we do, every transaction, meaning move a box from here to there, what kind of boxes do we purchase, how many people do we need every minute of the day. We are operating central scan, for example, with 60 individuals every minute of the day for 24/7 operation, and for the November election, probably 48 hours, and that means, a whole lot of people from a whole lot of other departments, which needs a lot of collaboration. But last election, I told my bosses, in a function like I am, I sometimes feel the janitor, sometimes indeed, as the gentleman stated, we are collaborating with every department. I'm in an incident command center with 911 and Department of Emergency Services. We are working with a flagger force to get our judges back on premises to bring the election results back. Like, there is so much going on. So really, as an election administrator, the people are everywhere, and we need, indeed, the whole county, the whole village, the whole state, everyone to help in the process. Not only people who work the election process, but also who support external as well, including people that are wanting to observe the process so we can keep it safe, secure, and transparent. So we need basically everyone to see the ins and outs of every part of the process.
Let's follow the ballot from the counties to the state level. Tell us how that process works. How do you get on the state level the information that these folks are collecting and tabulating and getting to the state level? And then what happens at that point? How does that work?
Yeah, it's interesting because I used to joke when I was Secretary of State that I was really mathematician in chief. Because, like, big surprise, like, actually elections are all about math. And we've got 67 counties in Pennsylvania, and they do, like, all the 10,000 folks in Philly, and I don't know how many people in Chester. Everybody's working around the clock to, make sure everybody can cast their ballot, count the ballots, check the ballots, reconcile all the records, do the audits, and then finally, 20 days after the election, they certify after, by the way, there's been an opportunity for, the public and, lawyers and courts to weigh in on all kinds of challenges. And then when they finally certify, they literally, everybody's used to, and this is part of the problem with misinformation. Our nation has gotten sort of addicted to we must know something on election night. And so they think those election night returns mean something official. They don't. They're unofficial. They're for your benefit. They're for all of our. We literally add together the spreadsheets of numbers that are given to us by the 67 counties, and then we certify the totals. So it's, and in Pennsylvania, and we can get to some of this too, like Pennsylvania, I thought it was hard to have 67 different counties running 67 different elections. But in our nation, we have 9,000 election jurisdictions in this country. Wisconsin has 1,900 alone. Michigan, 1,600. Maine, 500. So 67 counties was actually a walk in the park compared to those.
The fact that it is not the same everywhere, and the way you vote in your home county is not necessarily the way you vote in your home county or town, does that make it more difficult to gain people's trust when they're talking to their cousin and they say, well, my way's best, or my way's best, or how could your way be best if my way's best?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's part of fundamentally what we need folks to understand. The 9,000 election jurisdictions that we have in this country, it was designed that way. And the 67 counties, the Pennsylvania legislature, in its wisdom, designed that the county level is where a lot of the authority to make these decisions sits. That's statutory, that Chester County can determine whether or not they have drop boxes, whether or not they're going to have a cure period for people to come correct their ballots, and the decision that Chester County makes can be different than the decision that Tioga County makes, and that's completely allowable under Pennsylvania law and in most states across the country. However, and by the way, the localness of it and the differentness of it, in many ways adds security, like the complexity and the differences. So to have 67 counties, we've got 5 different voting system manufacturers. We have about 25 different configurations of voting systems in this state alone. And though that's complicated and people are confused to have different processes, it adds security, right? Because think about how hard it would be to hack into or try to hack into all those different layers that are different from each other, not to mention the 9,000 different election jurisdictions in this country. But to your point, the complexity, though it adds security, and the localness, though it adds the ability to make decisions that benefit the local people, it makes it really hard for people to understand. So we need to do a better job at raising the base level of understanding that people have about how elections work in this country.
Let's talk about one of the things that has changed with elections in Pennsylvania, which is mail-in voting, something that you all are dealing a lot with. And Karen, Tell me how you operate mail-in voting and what protections are in place to make sure that if you're voting by mail, you're not showing up and voting at the polls on Election Day.
Yes, actually, there are a lot of check and balances in place for mail-in voting. I sometimes say actually it's almost more check and balances as in-person voting. From the moment you apply, obviously you have to apply with appropriate information on your paperwork, a signature, a form of ID, which all has to be compared with the voter registration system, which is from the states. After appropriate completion of your paperwork and being approved for a ballot, that ballot has a specific barcode or an identifier on the declaration envelope. I want to make sure that I say that's not on the ballot itself. Ballots are not identifiable back to a voter, but the envelope, the pack, the mail pack belongs to that particular voter, to that particular ballot when it's mailed out. So when it comes back to us, we in Chester County, and I only can talk obviously for the county I work for, we have a mail sorting system, which we actually tell prior to every election, these are the only barcodes that this machine is allowed to take back in. If somebody unfortunately passes away, we know that directly. We block the barcode that belongs to the deceased voter. So even if the voter casted their mail-in ballot prior to passing away, prior to Election Day, we are not allowed to count that vote. So the machine is told on a daily basis, do not accept this anymore, do not accept this anymore, this person moved, and so on. So from the moment the ballots come back into the office, we already have that verification on that level. Then there's, we do an initial intake review, not to be confused with pre-canvassing. It's just purely to be able to submit a notice to cure to individuals to correct something if something is wrong. But then again, on Election Day, as in Pennsylvania, we cannot start prior to 7 a.m. That is something we would love to see change. But that's when we start pre-canvassing. And again, we are matching everything up, we're checking everything, and then it's opened. But there's so many unfortunate things that you can do with a mail-in ballot that are so many layers that are being checked, right? The declaration envelope we have a lot of unfortunate events where husband and wife sign each other's envelope, and then Mary signs John and John Mary. That is not the voter anymore. That's a mismatch. So there are a lot of reasons, unfortunately, why things are not being tabulated or counted, because there are, unfortunate situations where there are mistakes.
I know in Philadelphia, you all have actually posted online the names of voters whose ballots and whose envelopes have come back with issues that you could identify that might mean that they don't get counted. Not every county has handled that the same way. Why did you in Philadelphia make the decision to do it that way? And literally, you post, bless you, you post page after page of people's names.
Well, so Philadelphia, it's a lot of word of mouth. So with that little short window, reaching out to people to get somebody to come down and print out a replacement ballot, that's the most fastest, sort of efficient way. And when you look at that list, people start calling each other up, and we have pretty much success for it. But I think we have to be more on the offensive, on the front end. We need more educational forums. We need more attorneys willing to come out to the community to talk to the community, educate the community about voting. And we have to have diverse faces, because Philadelphia is a majority-minority city. So we need maybe recruitment partnership, I guess, maybe with HBCUs and their law schools to sort of push it so that people can have confidence in the systems. Because I don't think truly we know what we're up against. We're not up against facts, not up against law. What we're up against right now is a belief. And some people have a belief based off of your enthusiasm. So you can say everything right, but if you don't have the enthusiasm about the process, people are gonna look at you like, oh man, I'm just listening to what's going on social media. And so that's what we have to sort of understand. All attorneys here, we need some brave attorneys here that are willing to file lawsuits, that are willing to change some of these archaic laws that are on the state level that have not been changed. I mean, there's a lot of things that we need to address. So I just wanted to really make sure that that came really across, because the cities that, or the areas that are accused where nefarious activities are happening at is black and brown cities. It's Atlanta, it's Philadelphia, it's Detroit, it's Arizona, right? And the funny thing about the election deniers is they accept the election results from other areas where it's not the majority black and brown voters. They accept election results, and actually, their voter participation is like higher than like the average like people. It's just weird.
This is a good topic for lawyers in the room. What we have seen in Pennsylvania is a difficulty at the state level in Harrisburg to come to agreements to make changes, especially after Act 77 and the changes that were made in elections here. But we have seen lawsuits, and we have seen courts making decisions. And I wonder, Secretary, because of the political environment in Pennsylvania, do you think some of the changes that the commissioner was talking about wanting to make, or that the secretary was talking about when it comes to whether you have to put a date on the outside of your envelope, are the answers ultimately going to come from the courts instead of from the legislature, just because of the political reality?
Ooh, that's loaded. I think the answer is it's likely to be both. I mean, but yes, we've got a frozen Harrisburg. There's no question. And so, like the pre-canvassing issue is sort of a perfect example.
And that's one I know. I remember you talking a lot about.
4 years ago, right? I mean, we started talking, Act 77 was signed into law October 31st, 2019, a date that will be forever seared in my brain. And then, you know, we immediately, by Act 12, 2020, which was in March, by then we knew that COVID was going to change the numbers of ballots from thousands to millions, mail ballots. And so even then, we advocated for extending the pre-canvassing period, and all we got was we moved it, all the legislature would agree to is to move it back from 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. on Election Day. And this is
Explain, but I'm sorry to interrupt you. Explain what that means. When
the pre-canvassing?
Yes.
Okay.
Just in case.
So, and you
folks
guys
aren't following every little detail.
Why don't we, actually, can we throw that to them, and then we'll come back, because these guys are actually doing it. So.
Sure, I just want to make it, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. Whenever you talk about the nuts and bolts of elections, right? It's always a thing where people really don't understand it. But just imagine taking 300,000 envelopes, opening them up. After you open them up, you got to flatten them out. And after you flatten them out, you got to do something like another process and take them out of another secrecy envelope. So if you have 300,000 ballots, now you really have like 1 million ballots, because you're doing a lot of that processing. And a lot of the average person might say, oh, it's just nothing. You just take the ballots out, you just flip them around. But you have to sort them, you have to get them prepared. And it's like, if we had, what's funny about pre-canvass, people say, well, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I said, look, just give me 2 days. I'll be happy with just 2 days, and you'll see the sort of, impact on elections. But again, what's critical is when we're explaining this stuff to regular people, right? Mm-hmm. That you want to always, push them to the websites, whatever the county website is, or the Secretary of State, or Committee of 70, or, trusted organizations. But this again, you have to sort of understand that nothing's going wrong, and the way how you're explaining it, you have to explain it like in a way that people can understand it. But, it's a lot. It's a lot. Technology is helping out a lot. We had more funding, I think, from the federal level for counties to purchase better technological stuff, where you want to do your sorting, you want to get
machines that will actually open and flatten.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff that, and some counties can't afford it because they have to make tough decisions. Do I get sorter or do I pay for security? You know, these are questions that we never once had to, and now you even have to really have a PR sort of team now. You have to really think about, okay, how do we have, you have to get PR consultants now to talk and get media training from everybody who's going to be interacting with the media. So our budgets, if anything else, advocate for all county officials and people who oversee elections to get more resources. And it can't be, you get a grant and then there's all these stipulations to it. I think the counties have unique individual needs, and the county should decide, you know, how those resources should be spent.
Go ahead,
So what I would say is, like, pre-canvassing is a boring, like an administrative thing. It's literally like taking envelopes, papers out of envelopes and figuring out, getting it done so that you can actually be ahead of schedule, right? So if you allow it to start, and by the way, like, I think 46 states in this country allow pre-canvassing. Pennsylvania is one of about 4 in the entire country that doesn't let you start until Election Day. So this is an example when you were asking about things getting done. How often do you have a problem like pre-canvassing where everybody agrees that it's a problem, right? Election officials, voters, people who want results quickly. It literally, the solution is obvious. The solution is to allow it starting sooner. It would cost nothing, because they're already doing it. It would allow them to spread out the people, right? And the solution, changing the law, would 100% solve the problem. How often do you have that happen and still have the legislature not do it, right?
We just had it with the primary date.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's another perfect example, right? Like, it's Passover. I mean, are you kidding me? You can't come up with another date. But so, all this to say, the justice system, and I think Al made this point, and I think others made this point, the justice system worked exactly the way that it should have in 2020. And unfortunately, I think that they're going to be put on the spot again. And it's to all of us. I mean, I am forever grateful to the lawyers, you know, across the Commonwealth and the country, frankly, who stood up and worked their, can I use language? I won't, just in case. And, you know, and really, so to your point, like, I do think that the justice system is going to be put on the spot again.
May
I'm
I
gonna
add
take
something? I'm sorry.
Yes, absolutely. Let me just take a moment. I'm a little belated in saying this. We are going to open this up to questions in just a few minutes. So if you have a question you would like to ask, we are going to pass you a note card. So as we get another answer, just raise your hand if you've got a question, and somebody's going to bring you a card while we keep talking. Don't be shy. I'm going to turn away. You can raise your hands. Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to add, there is a lot of things that are obvious to the people that are looking at the outside in. We administer, so for us things are obvious too. If we all together would have a priority list and actually do something with it, that would be really great, right? What we see always is we had Act 77, then Act 12, then Act 88. Like, every time something happens, it's like, oh great, let's do this, then let's do it fast, then tell the election administrators that administer the counties, like 2 months before this is supposed to be happening. And it is a law, which is not a standard operating procedure. If I need to dissect a law, I have to see, what do I need to buy? How do I accomplish this? How many people? What do, you know, then all of a sudden, everyone is buying the equipment. It's on back order. So I understand a whole lot of people want to get things done. We need to find a priority list, see what benefits the most people, bipartisan, actually plan it logically, see what is all involved financially, and to get it actually done in the right way. So we all are prepared. Because we, Philadelphia, Chester County, we collaborate a lot. We talk together. I have some of your people on my speed dial. We have the same equipment. We have the same vendors. We draw from the same technicians and all the stuff. So what we have seen over the years, every time when a law happens, it happens too close to an election, we should say, it is the election after, so we have like 6 months to actually come up with something, because a law is not a standard operating procedure, which is a whole different ballgame, right? For me to dissect a law and come up with an operational plan is something that happens after that, and that cannot happen last minute, and unfortunately that's what we kind of always see. So we always have to think quickly and come up with something, and that's where you see the variances. Now 67 counties are getting a new law. They have their own board of elections and their own legal team advising them on how to interpret that law, what we all buy, and how we all make our own standard operating procedure. You will have 67 variations, and that is what people will see at the poll.
Let's take a turn. I want to talk to all of you about something that we are seeing with election staff, election workers, sometimes potentially volunteers may be concerned about it as well, which is threats against those working to put on our elections. And I'm looking at my notes because there's some new data out from the Brennan Center for Justice, a new survey of local election officials. They found that 38% experienced threats, harassment, or abuse. 54% said they are concerned about the safety of colleagues. How are you all dealing with this, and are you experiencing it?
Well, yes, but again, when you're going back to the whole election denialism sort of movement, that's what it is. It's a movement to cast doubt on our elections. So they have studied every single process that we do, and they try to make it seem like something's not going on right. So we have to understand that, again, it's the information, it's how you present it, and just, your enthusiasm about each process. But when you talk about security, even with the electioneers, what they have done, like just take the term threat, right? So in 2020, they would say, we got threats on our life. But then now we're starting to get threats, but it's not the term threat. They know exactly what to say under the threshold where it will be classified as a threat. So it definitely has to be better laws to protect election officials. Those laws really haven't been updated. Like the people that were convicted at the convention center that had automatic weapons, they got out on bail, right? And then they went down to January 6th and got arrested down there. And then even after they got convicted, it was just they got like house arrest or something like that. So it has to be a coordination, like we have to strengthen our gun laws. It's a lot of different mechanisms that of course is partisan divide, but we have to really take a critical look to do that. And I think everybody has to work on the same page. There's a lot of elected officials and legislators who making laws. They don't even talk to the county level. They just come back with here's what we're proposing. It's like, how are we inside we weren't even at the table. And they say, we spoke to committee at 70. I'd be like, yeah, I love 70, but you got to bring everybody sort of to the table, right? And you got to bring in different voices, because there are some municipalities that got more dare than people. So it's different than Philadelphia, how you sort of roll out a law. So it definitely needs to be more communication to do this. And I think the courts are going to play a larger role than anything else. And
How is that environment impacting the ability to simply get enough staff, get enough volunteers, and have the ability to responsibly and efficiently put on elections?
So,
well, just real quick. So it actually opened up the door, because like the task force that the secretary has is great. The FBI, Homeland Security, all of those agencies wasn't never talking or never communicating before. So now they are sort of communicating now, right? In a more cohesive sort of way. When we receive a threat, we have the appropriate channels, where we send it out. They'll investigate it better. And then they'll also offer recommendations. Like at our facility, it's very unique. In 2020, we did it down at the convention center. So that's more in Philadelphia. You don't really see somebody coming from outside Philadelphia. But now we up in the far northeast where we literally like a stone's throw from Bucks County. So that's where our election facility is. It's a beautiful facility, about 200,000 square feet, but we had to get fencing. I mean, there's a lot of upgrades that we had to do, but, you know, I think it's all for the better because nobody was paying attention to elections, period. So I think election workers, I believe that they're safer now than what they were in 2020.
There are safeguards. I think we do have some questions from the audience that we want to get to. Thank you. Okay, got. Okay. All right. I think, Commissioner Spear, this is for you. Someone is asking, can you expand on how Philadelphia has improved its voting process through technology?
Sure. So we got these poll worker machines. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's like these poll pads that we got for our poll workers. And we used to have these old like books where the poll worker used to bring the books was heavy. They used to physically write the names in. For the poll workers, they had to check them. We used to print them out, give it to them. But now we got these poll pads and I was really apprehensive about introducing the poll pads because I thought that the seniors wouldn't like it. Oh my, Lorna tells you, the seniors, they love them. I mean, it makes it so much smoother when they open up to type it in, and the pay is going to be a lot faster. Before you have to wait 6 to 8 weeks to pay people, and because people would write on these payroll sheets, sometimes people would put the wrong information and the information wasn't legible. But now we have these poll pads where you can type everything in. And I think the first pay is going to go out within 2 weeks. So poll workers will receive their pay within like 2 weeks of today.
So this is a question about pre-canvassing, and actually this is, I think, an opportunity to explain a little bit more about how pre-canvassing works and how it does not, because the question is, could pre-canvassing and the publication of those results have a chilling effect on election day if people see that their candidate is already losing? But when you do pre-canvassing, you are not publishing those results.
Correct. It is, there's no,
Nor are you tabulating them.
Exactly.
You're not publishing or tabulating.
Yeah. So, I mean, think of it as you can do everything but the final counting and reporting of the votes. So basically, you're taking, you're scanning the outer envelope, you're determining that the person was an eligible voter, you're then taking it out of the envelope, you're taking it out of the second envelope, you're flattening, you're scanning it into the machine, and that's it. And then it just takes then the final tabulation and the reporting. And again, did I mention that 46 out of 50 states in the country do this? Have any of you raise your hand if you've ever heard about an early leak of election? It doesn't happen. That's because we know how to do this, because election officials, by the way, thank you again for another successful election. I mean, these are the heroes, these are our professionals, they know how to do this.
I think that's it for our audience questions, but I had one more question that we didn't get to, and it's something I think one of you brought up at one point, which was poll watchers. And I noticed in a press release I got this past week from the RNC, they put out a press release saying we had 2,000 poll watchers in Pennsylvania during the primary race. And Karen, I wonder if you could just address what poll watchers do and whether that has changed at all in the past few cycles with sort of an increased spotlight on Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so we have poll watchers that watch the poll, right? I always tell my poll worker they watch, they don't necessarily engage and talk because they literally observe, watch the process at the polling place. So in-person voting at a poll, we call them poll watchers. They watch inside. So these are people that were identified by either parties or candidates, depending on the election. The parties bring them forward. We as a county check that they are qualified electors of the district or the state, depending on which race it is for. And we in Chester County issue them a watcher certificate. Now, this kind of links a little bit in with the earlier conversation about security. As security is high on our minds, and we keep adding layers and layers and layers. In Chester County, this past election, which was just the 23rd, we actually added a badge system in which everyone participating in the election authorized by the county or even watching have an identifier badge on their neck, really. So when the voters come into the poll, they also can identify and see that everyone that is in there is legit. For check and balances, when a watcher arrives at the poll, they check in by us with the judge of elections. In Chester County, they check in at their polling place with the judge of elections, and they keep a log because every watcher has rules, and they were authorized, and they are authorized until they are doing something that is not an authorized behavior or action, then that should be reported to the county administration, which is my department. And then we actually work with the parties or the committee people, the parties, to talk, really, to kind of mitigate the situation with that person. But we actually encourage watchers. Watchers should be there, right? The election is a transparent process. The elections are there for voters to go and vote, for people to feel confident. And watchers are not police officers of the process. They are just there to create confidence, to have and I actually encourage them to talk to me because I like to hear what they see. Do we train the poll workers good enough? Is all the behaviors of the poll workers also appropriate? It's like a mix of people that we all together make elections work. And what the watchers' feedback is really good. Now, at mail-in voting operation, which we call Central Scan, they are not calling poll watchers, they are called observers. And we do have a similar process in Chester County that is open to the public 24/7. We did add additional security layers. This year I installed close to 200 lockers, like you go to the gym. When an observer comes to my Central Scan facility, they go to security checkpoints from the sheriff or county security. They check in, their name and credentials are checked. We do check ID to make sure that we know who's actually on the floor. They are getting an orange vest, which we can identify the people that are not workers, but observers. They don't all like that, but that is, for check and balances. And then they have to put all their personal belongings into a locker, and they can keep just carrying the key. Now, that is actually an election security measure that I implemented for this year because I do not want anything to leave the floor, obviously. We want to keep it open to the public for full transparency, but with the nature of elections, we just need to take all measures to clearly identify who is on the floor. Are they authorized? Do they know the rules? Put their belongings away. Nothing is missing from the floor. So yes, over the last few years, I do think our staff, even though it's not nice to see all these measures that we have to take maybe to make them more secure, I do think there is more awareness and more steps in place to keep election workers safe.
All right, thank you all for your time and your perspective. We really appreciate it. Thank you all.
If I can, real quick, I just want to give a shout out to my children. That's 5 of them. I got 2 more. They've been real good sports. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back with another panel. You flew in from LA? Because it was a good one. It would have been a good. Is this still on? Ah, it is. All right, we're going to start in just a moment. Come on in. All right. All right, we're going to get started as folks continue to filter in. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. This is our next panel, and I want to introduce former Congressman Charlie Dent. I'm sorry, this is Charles Dent. Charlie's fine. Okay.
Charlie's fine. Charles when I'm in trouble.
Oh, boy. Let's hope you're not in trouble today. Former Congressman Charlie Dent. He is currently the Executive Director and Vice President of the Aspen Institute Congressional Program. And Andrew McGinley is Vice President of External Affairs for the Committee of 70. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us.
I'm also with a law firm of DLA Piper, too. I should mention that.
All right, there you go.
Thank you for having us.
Well, let's start out, actually. I want to hear from both of you to sort of set the stage about what you are working on this election year. What is your focus right now when it comes to the election information? And Andrew, we'll start with you.
Sure.
With Committee of 70. Tell me what you are focusing on at this point and what that is going to look like as the year goes on.
Yeah, thank you so much. So for folks who don't know, Committee of 70, we were founded in 1904. We really focus on making government responsive, transparent, and accountable. And our goal is to get every eligible voter to vote with confidence, and be informed when they vote. And so when we talk about what are we doing this election year and in this election cycle, I think we should take a little bit of a step back, because I think we end up breeding apathy in voters if every time we talk to them, we say, this is the most important election of your lifetime. And then what, right? So they vote, what is the next thing? So we are focused, and has Committee of 70 has been focused on for years, really connecting the dots between voting, government, quality of life, and how all these different pieces fit together. So we do think that every election is important, but we want to make sure that folks understand government, understand these different roles, and understand how their voice matters and impacts the actual government that they receive every day. We do that through a couple of different ways. We do, the standard voter education, reminding folks about deadlines, reminding folks about the election, all of those very sort of simple things. And then we take it a step deeper. So when it comes to election information, our online ballot guide, you can go online, enter in your address, you get all the information about who is on your ballot, what is on your ballot, up and down. And we include there information about what those different offices do, who those candidates are, and why those offices are important. And we really focus on that year round. Just last week, I met with, had a chance to interview Jen Coatsworth from the Philadelphia Bar Association about the Attorney General's office. We didn't talk about the race, we talked about what does an Attorney General do? Why does it matter? And we really are focusing on those sort of initiatives. Something we're really proud of is our How Philly Works guide. That is like true civic education, the nuts and bolts of how the city of Philadelphia's government works. It can be very intimidating and very hard to get that information. So we've created a guide, and we talk about the Philadelphia City Charter, the mayor, how the mayor and city council work together or sometimes don't, how the city budget works, all of these different pieces that really do impact the quality of life. And that's not an election year initiative, that's not an election cycle initiative, that is a year-round, years-long effort to really help people understand why voting matters, not just the need to vote.
Congressman, tell me what you're focusing on this year.
Yeah, I don't have any real formal role in elections. I really don't. And so what I've been, for whatever it's worth, I've been just trying to explain to as many people as I can that we run good elections in this country and in this Commonwealth. We know how to run an election, and I don't worry so much about what happens before the election and actually election day and the actual counting of the votes. It's usually pretty good. That's not to say there are always some errors or some irregularities, but usually they're corrected. And they're usually discovered and corrected fairly quickly. My concern has always been, since 2020, was what happens after the election. People, contesting state certifications, people just simply not accepting outcomes. In other words, that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we face in this country with respect to elections is that some people just do not respect an outcome. And it's not just, I'm discovering, it's not just on Election Day or doing public voting, but I see it in Congress regularly where somebody doesn't, a small rump wing of a party can basically thwart the will of the majority by, say, on the Ukraine vote. And there was a small group that didn't want to vote on Ukraine. Well, everybody knew months ago that there were over 300 votes for this, and they just voted on it a week and a half ago, and it got over 300 votes. Usually when you don't do your job in a democracy, if you don't bring up bills for a vote, it's usually because you don't have the votes. In other words, you're short a few. But these are not being brought up because a rump wing is trying to prevent the majority from working its will. And just by the same token on elections, we'll see in the fall, there are some folks who are going to tell you that the election is rigged and stolen. And even if it's run well, if people believe that the outcome is preordained or if the outcome is rigged, I'm not sure that's a big problem. And I'm not sure we know how to address that if the public does not believe in the integrity of our electoral system. So I try to explain to people that the electoral system, the election system, works pretty well. And we generally don't have a lot of problems with it. Again, that's not to say there haven't been incidents. There always are over the years. But by and large, we run good elections. It's dealing with the after effects. The Electoral Count Act was enacted about a year or so ago, I guess now, to help determine what the roles of the vice president is during the certification process and what can and cannot be done. I think was a big step forward.
We'll get into a little bit of what happens after the election, but you wrote a column right before Election Day, speaking of trying to reach people, sort of talking about the security of elections in Pennsylvania, laying out how things work. I wonder, first of all, A, why you felt that was necessary to do, and then B, what was the response that you got to it, given the environment that we're in?
Yeah, the response was fairly positive, but I'd like to let people know certain things about the integrity of their vote. We always, some states, for example, have these, they have to match the signatures to make sure that, and we do something better in Pennsylvania. I think we take the last four numbers of your social security number and your driver's license number as a way to identify you rather than a signature, which, are pretty messy generally. So I try to explain to people that we actually, I've been through 13 elections. I run for office 13 times. I like to say I'm 13-0, undefeated and unindicted so far. So far. And but the point I guess I want to make on that is that I've seen so many elections, and I can't say that I always found that the people who ran the elections in this state, and I probably think it's true around the country, the people, these people who run the county election offices, I always said they're kind of like clerks. They're administrators. They want to run a clean election. Mm-hmm. They want to make sure that they have the polls manned, that they tally the votes, and that they can announce a winner. They're not looking for problems. They don't look for the problems. They don't want problems. But when they do happen, I have found that whenever I saw issues in my own elections where I saw an irregularity, we would point it out to them. Hey, this doesn't look right. And they check, and usually we were right, and they fixed it. And I found that they were pretty honorable people, whether they were Democrats or Republicans running those election offices. That had always been my experience. And I think a lot of people now, when they hear about elections being stolen, being rigged,
I said, I'm not saying there hasn't ever been a bad election where there was an election stolen. We had one in Philadelphia many years ago, in 1994, the Mark Stinson race. There was a big problem with the absentee ballots. It does happen on occasion. But by and large, that's the rare exception, not the norm. I fear now that a lot of people think that the norm is that we have this flawed system of electing people, and that's why I thought it was important to write.
When you're trying to combat misinformation about elections, Andrew, how much of a challenge is that for you or for anyone when people are getting their information from so many different sources? They're getting it online, they're getting it from friends who are getting it online. How do you combat that kind of information flow?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I mean, I think we all have a personal responsibility as attorneys, as trusted voices like the congressman, to really make sure the information we're sharing is accurate and true and complete. On a much lighter note, I think of something I did this winter. It was a very dark, terrible January. I was looking at, Twitter, and I saw something that said, like, in 50 days, the sun's going to set at 7 p.m. I took a screenshot of it, and I posted it on my Instagram story, because I don't tweet, I just Instagram. And all these people were like, yo, this is so great. It wasn't true. It wasn't true. I wanted it to be true, right? So I believed it. So when I'm reading media, when I'm sharing information, I always, that was a bad example, but I really try to be responsible about how I'm thinking about information, that people do look at me for some reason as someone that they should trust. And then we have to make, choices to elevate voices that might not be the same, might not have the same perspective as us, right? Trusted voices in different communities are going to be the real way that we combat that misinformation. So people need to hear from diverse voices across the political spectrum, across the city, across the state and the country about these issues. That's why, we were very quick to share Congressman Dent's op-ed in our weekly newsletter at Committee of 70 that people really look to for information about elections, because it was a great op-ed that really was just an important voice on an important issue, just reminding folks that our elections in Pennsylvania are safe and secure.
The only thing I might add to that, this explosion of information, of bad information out in the ether, so many Americans don't share the same facts anymore. I mean, they just got to the point where they're living in alternative realities. You can have a conversation with a person on a particular issue. I just read something on Russia recently that Vladimir Zelensky was supposedly, persecuting Christians. Well, it was nonsensical. It was absurd. But people believe this stuff. They read it and they believe it. When the truth is, it's actually the Russians who have been persecuting a lot of Christians who are not Orthodox, and that's true. But so the world gets turned upside down, and I don't know how you correct this. And I used to complain when I was in Congress. I used to get an email, and there's a lot more bad information now because there's a lot more sources, a lot more people on all sorts of apps. But I remember I used to always get something. I probably got maybe 100 emails a week or a month on, well, you members of Congress, you can retire at full salary after 2 years. And, it wasn't true. And I tell people, well, if that were the case, why would you serve more than 2 years? But this didn't matter. That you explain to people it's just simply not true. It's just made up. But multiply that many times over on a lot more substantive issues and things maybe that are a little less egregious but still very false are out there. And so and again, people are going to these sites that reinforce their existing opinions or biases. That's what they do. And they just don't really go to another site or change the channel or whatever they do nowadays. And so I'm not sure how we figured that out. This is a much bigger problem than we're going to figure out here. But it's a problem everywhere in this world, not just here in the United States, in any country where they have free and fair elections.
It is also layered by the fact that if we ask people to go to trusted sources, they may think, okay, well, I can go to my member of Congress and their social media account, for example, but if they are then sharing the misinformation, then that complicates things, and that...
Well, it gets back to editors. I really learned to appreciate editors. At least I always knew that,
As a former newspaper person, I do.
At NBC, or pick your favorite local newspaper, or a major national paper, whether you like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or Washington Post, or Politico, they have editors. You know, I've done work for CNN, and I would write op-eds for CNN, and I was always liked the fact that somebody is like fact-checking me and asking me for citations or sources. I mean, that's a great thing. But nowadays, you know, a lot of people putting stuff out there. I can assure you there are no editors, and there's nobody looking over their shoulders. They just spew it out. And many of them do it rather knowingly. And this, I mean, I was stunned the other day when I was watching the Trump trial that David Pecker, who said that, you know, basically this story about Ted Cruz. Now, Ted Cruz is not necessarily a sympathetic figure. However, accusing his father of being involved with the JFK assassination and Lee Harvey Oswald, I mean, it was a fabricated story. And they admitted it. And I'm saying, my goodness, I mean, where's the lawsuit right now? I mean, they call, I don't call that journalism, but I think a lot of people do. They go to the grocery store, they see the checkout counter, and they see that, well, they make the stuff up. I mean, I didn't realize it was that bad over there at National Enquirer.
I think one of the things we say at 70 is, like, if you want people to be protected from that misinformation, is to encourage them to get involved, right? So if you serve as a poll worker or a poll watcher, you are part of the community, you see how elections work. There's always a need, and that is the best way. Then you have that faith, you know? If you watch, our commissioners have public meetings every week on Wednesdays at 11. They're live streamed here in Philadelphia. You don't even have to go up to Northeast Philadelphia. Getting involved and like taking the time to watch that will really help protect you from that misinformation. It's a big ask, but it's a huge opportunity to really increase your understanding of democracy and the process, and then you're less likely to buy these fake stories.
When it comes to the environment that we're in, and you know, you referenced the Ukraine vote and sort of what it took to get that, and ultimately how people really voted on that. But getting people to compromise is a challenge these days. And I wonder how that also plays into the idea of what we believe. Because, and I mentioned in the previous panel the election date situation in Pennsylvania, where no one wanted April 23rd for primary election day in Pennsylvania. Republicans didn't want it, Democrats didn't want it, election officials didn't want it, no one wanted it. Guess when the primary was? It was April 23rd, because they could not come to a compromise on it. And when you can't compromise, can't find a solution on something involving your elections, the simple date issue, then how do you come together and stand together on the rest of it if it's that difficult to compromise and have a conversation about that? How does that play into things?
I think if we knew the exact answer, things would be much better in this country. It's a huge challenge, and I would say, like, they can compromise. They don't, right? Or they won't compromise. It's a choice that elected officials are making, and I think the public needs to engage in that. There was possibly some compromise on election reform in Pennsylvania today. I think the House passed the pre-canvassing bill, like while we were sitting here. I don't know if that's part of a deal with the Senate to get that done, but that would be huge, and that would be a huge show of faith for all of us. It's a 7-day pre-canvassing bill. That's all that's in the bill. I'm guessing it's part of some compromise. I'm hoping it's part of some compromise. Otherwise, I think it's probably not going to pass anywhere in the Senate. We don't know the details on that yet, but I think it might be. It's a light at the end of a tunnel, possibly. I'm not sure, but we really just need to encourage people to get engaged and really make sure that they're hearing from, make sure elected officials are hearing from their constituents about these issues.
And part of the reason why you don't get a lot of compromise these days is because so many people in elected office represent very safe seats. They feel they have to tack hard to their base, stay there, that many elements of their base feel that compromise equals capitulation or surrender. And if you think the other side is an enemy or evil, how can you ever compromise with them? I mean, I hate to say it, but that's part of what's happened. And there's not a political reward, or it doesn't seem there's enough of a political reward for a lot of these folks in government to compromise. Now I'm talking more at Congress and even at the state legislative level. A lot of folks simply just They're very fearful. Their political safety is staying very close to that base. They see if they're seen as a consensus builder or a compromiser, that they are going to be politically vulnerable. And so that's why you see less of it. I think it's that simple.
There was we talked in the last panel about this new data from the new survey from the Brennan Center for Justice. There was also another statistic in that survey that came out of there that I thought was interesting. It was election officials being surveyed. 62% said they were concerned regarding political leaders attempting to intervene with election officials doing their job. Does that number surprise you, and does it concern you?
No and yes. I think that's a little outside of 70s wheelhouse, but I'm not surprised by that number. And it's absolutely concerning. And I think it's a reasonable, election administrators are very serious people who really want to do the job effectively and efficiently, and I'm not surprised that they're concerned.
Yeah, I'd be concerned. I guess we all heard the Brad Raffensperger tape, right? The former president did call him on the phone and said, I need 11,800, whatever many votes, nearly 12,000 votes. And it was a pretty damning call. I just thought about it, again, in my time in office, I would never have thought of picking up the phone and calling an election official, say, hey, I'm short a few hundred votes, why don't you help me out? It just wouldn't have fathomed. I couldn't have thought of doing that. The only time we ever, my campaign ever called an election office if there was a question or, or a comment, we saw something, we tell them. But, we don't make demands. So I think the public is concerned, although I don't think that most election officials are in the business of picking up the phone, at least my experience. Maybe Kathy has a different experience having served in those roles. That a lot of elected officials are calling, they're complaining about, how the election is run. That wasn't my experience. I don't know if she saw that, but I certainly didn't see it. But the fact that 62% of our public believes that election officials are doing it, it's a problem.
And you mentioned that tape, and I wanted to kind of transition into talking about some of the things in 2020 and sort of things that have been done or could be done to prevent some of the things that we saw there. But it is unclear whether we will see any trials regarding January 6th and the handling of the election, any of the election-related trials. Of course, we're watching the hush money trial go on in New York right now, but we don't know. We may not see any of the election-related cases go to trial before the election. When it comes to making it clear what is criminal, what is not criminal, and giving people reasons to trust the system, are you worried at all about that not being buttoned up before the election and having it sort of hanging out there if it's not wrapped up?
I do worry about you've already discussed pre-canvassing here. I think that's an issue, because I remember in 2020 getting calls from people around the country saying, what's going on in Pennsylvania? Why is it taking so long? I said, well, because they couldn't process the ballots. And first time they did mail-in voting, 3.5 million people voted by mail, and they couldn't sort these things out. They couldn't start opening these things, processing them before the election, and so they're processing. It's going to take about 4 or 5 days, and you'll get an outcome. But a lot of people, so that didn't inspire confidence in a lot of folks. They didn't know, when you hear the reason, okay, it's understandable, but they didn't know that. And it takes a little bit of, understanding of the system to make that explanation. So like pre-canvassing in Pennsylvania would actually do a lot of good, because you could probably see
Absolutely.
You could see, what was likely to be the outcome on election night or the morning after, maybe. So I think that would be enormously helpful. And I think some of the other things too, there are a lot of people too, like I got to tell you, I've heard a lot of people over the years tell me it's so hard to vote. I don't buy it. I saw the Pew polls saying that 95% of the American public thinks it's easy to vote. 94% of Democrats and 96% of Republicans. This is Pew Charitable Trust. And, I agree with that. And, and I tend to think that sometimes, like, you get back down to Georgia, Stacey Abrams made a lot of noise. She thought she got ripped off. And, I hear people talk about voter suppression. I'll tell you, the greatest act of voter suppression I've seen in my lifetime, at least not my lifetime, I said in recent times, not going back to the 60s when we had real issues, but was when Donald Trump suppressed his own vote by telling people not to vote by mail. I mean, that was an incredible act of suppression of his own vote. I mean, really stupid. It was malpractice. But I think sometimes we're quick to say things that, point that try to say there are problems where there aren't necessarily problems. And we have a lot of problems in this system. But as I said, most of the problems occurred after the elections, not before.
Yeah, just to echo that, I think when we look at Pennsylvania, where we were in 2020 versus where we are now going into another presidential election, we don't have a new mail-in ballot system. This is not the first presidential election using the new voting machines. In Philadelphia, we have e-poll books. There's a ton of reasons to have a lot of faith in Pennsylvania elections based on everything that's changed, all the technology that's been put into place by the city commissioners here in Philadelphia. We are in a very different place. There's no COVID pandemic happening, right? So when we're doing the canvassing and the tallying, that can all happen without 6 feet of separation between people. It is a very different election, and I think we are in a better place, and we have a lot of reasons to be very confident. The equipment's been used, the equipment's been tested, they are prepared to make sure that election is executed fairly and securely.
What about after the election? Are we in a better place to avoid what happened?
Well, in terms of the Electoral Count Act reforms, yes, we're in a better place. But if one of the major candidates says, the election's stolen, and your followers many of your followers are going to believe that, you still have a problem. Again, it gets back to the issue of accepting outcomes. If some people don't accept outcomes, we're going to have a lot of controversy after the election, I suspect. So I'm anticipating this to be a pretty darn rough election cycle. Again, I am not optimistic that even though the reforms have been made, we should be able to certify the vote better. But again, a significant part of the country may not accept the outcome. Yeah. And I don't know how to. Again, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that. How do you address that? You were talking too about the law that Pennsylvania passed. Just thinking about this as you were talking. That whole compromise to allow for no excuse absentee voting was paired with the elimination of straight ticket voting. Mm-hmm. It was actually a very good compromise. I've been beating on the legislature for years to fix that straight ticket voting issue. We were like one of only a handful of states that was doing it, and a Republican and a plurality of Democrats voted. I like people splitting their tickets, so let's get rid of this. And I was working with a guy from Utah, a Democrat from Utah, who were working together on this. And finally, Pennsylvania came around and did it, and they tied it to the absentee voting with no excuse. I thought that was fine. And now it's it passed almost unanimously, I think, in both chambers, or unanimously in one and overwhelming in the other. But it's hard to imagine, though, that we've gotten to this point in this country where people just question the idea of free and fair elections. What's even worse, it's not just that, but people question, there are people who challenge the independence of the judiciary. They challenge all the prerequisites that you need in a democratic society. A free press, independent judiciary, all these rule of law issues. That's the real issue that we're going to confront again, after I'm afraid, after the election. Hopefully we won't see the same type of thing, but I fear that there could be civil disorder, not just in Washington, but around the country. Yeah. Watch the states where they're going to be going through their certification process out in Harrisburg and Columbus and Annapolis and every other state capital, where they're going to have to, watch those proceedings this year. That's what I'm concerned. And there are 50 opportunities for mischief there.
Yeah, I think we saw in 2020 that they thought the courts were a soft spot where they could get things done that were, folks who were anti-democratic thought that they could accomplish goals through the courts that they weren't able to do. And I think that those people probably have other plans. And I don't know what that looks like, but it's definitely something that we should all be concerned about and be prepared for, to really think about, are they going to what does that look like? How do you try to overturn an election if people want to do that?
Yeah, and they'll find lawyers to make the case. I mean, that's the thing. That's what they were talking about earlier, Judge Luttig and Jay Johnson. I mean, there will be lawyers who know better, who will do this. I assume they're being paid. And
As a lawyer, I do like to get paid, so.
Just put a pin in that for just 1 second. We are going to take questions again from the audience. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. Somebody will bring you a card, and you can write your question down. We'll take those in just a few minutes. Just to pick that up, we talked about sort of, are we in a better place? Are there still soft spots, whether it's before the election, after the election, that you think need to be addressed either by a court, by legislation, by executive order, if that's possible in a state, statewide or federally, to shore up any of our systems?
There are. I mean, I think what we're seeing, as the Secretary talked about earlier, the task force, Commissioner Sabir talked about having all of those different voices, not just elections administrators, but folks focus on security and protecting those folks. Having everyone in the room together talking is the way we address that. I mean, I'm not sure there's an executive order that could be issued that would solve all of the problems. And there's obviously legislative changes we want to how elections are administered here in Pennsylvania. I wouldn't say we want them now, just before a presidential election. So I'm hopeful that that task force has a lot of success in making sure that our elections, that we stir up those soft spots, that we identify them now and address them.
Yeah, I think the best thing we can do is continue to educate the public. For example, we were always worried about, could the Russians or the Chinese, manipulate a tabulation? My answer to that is that we've got a very decentralized system of elections. It'd be really hard to do that. Maybe they could find a jurisdiction and maybe make some real mischief. But we have all these different, how many thousands? 9,000 different election operations. I always say we don't run a national election in the United States. We run 50 state elections. That's what we do. And it'd be really hard to, for a bad actor to cause, an effect on the tallies. There are things like that we like to talk about. I think other education too is if we cannot get this these mail-in ballots pre-cleared, pre-sorted, we're going to be in the same situation as we were in 2020, where one candidate will look like, it could be like the Republicans tend to vote more at the ballots, so it looks like, the Republicans will be winning or Trump would be winning. But when you look at the absentee ballots coming in at a rate of what they were then, 3-1 Democratic, well, it's not shocking then that the mail-in ballots skewed to Biden heavily. But people didn't want to believe that, even though it was true. And so that's the kind of thing that I think scares people. Again, it's the whole issue of pre-sorting would help that problem a lot. But it's about education, and a lot of people simply don't understand this.
When it comes to the mail-in ballots, we have seen on the Republican side an effort to try to embrace them, at least by saying, we want you to do this. And, in Pennsylvania, the party had a whole campaign they called it Bank Your Vote. They talked about it, but does just saying it, is that enough to convince people and instill confidence? Because it doesn't seem to be getting through to everyone.
No, it's not doing it. It doesn't do any good because the candidate is saying it's still a bad process. He still says it's rigged. Despite the Republican Party of Pennsylvania and other states are encouraging people, trying to make it easier to vote by mail, when the candidate says, don't vote by mail, or it's you can't trust it.
That's despite the fact that he put out a video himself encouraging people to bank their vote, but you're correct, still has said.
But I've heard him say it again recently, that that's a problem. And by the way, having run in so many elections, for most of the 90s and even into the 2000s, the Republican Party was much better than the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania at absentee voting. Very organized. I mean, every year I would always get my absentee ballot in the mail, whether I needed it or not. the application, they would always send me that. They're very organized. I mean, they could easily be as good or better than the Democrats in this, but they have to want to do it, and you need the leadership from the very top. The top person has to fully embrace it and encourage it. If he were to stand up there and say, vote by mail, and repeat it and keep saying it, I think it would make a difference. But that's not what's happening right now.
I agree. I mean, I think it helps, but it's certainly not going to solve the problem of people on one side of the aisle who may distrust that system. But hearing from people who they know, who they trust in their community saying, vote by mail, bank your vote, I mean, that is helpful, but it's not going to solve a massive misinformation campaign that's been going on for a long time.
Which kind of gets to, if you are going to combat misinformation, it goes to what we were talking about in terms of online information and people reposting information, maybe people that they say they trust. Is it about reaching the loudest voices, or is it about reaching the people who are listening to them?
I think it's about reaching the people who are listening to them. I mean, so we have a program called We Vote at Committee of 70, where we're partnering with employers and community organizations and religious organizations to get information to them about elections. So, National Registered Vote Day, Vote at Home Day, getting that information out through people that they already know and that they're already hearing from. And that's a very useful program, but it's also a tool that in the future, if we need to combat like big misinformation, people are used to hearing from the Committee of 70. They're used to hearing from, their community organization about this, and they're a network to disseminate accurate information about the election should we need it in the future. But for now, it's really just about getting information out to voters about the process. We are very focused on getting clear information out. We're updating videos on what happens when you vote by mail. So like you fill out your ballot, you send it in, what happens? Really showing people visually, the entire process to help fight that disinformation. But it takes all voices. It takes a lot of work from a lot of different people. And that's why we're partnering with so many different organizations through We Vote to really elevate that conversation.
Do we have some questions from the audience? I think this goes to what we were talking about in terms of, I think we talked at one point about what's going to happen after the election. The question is about calls for a civil war from one side. It really just goes to the idea of rhetoric and what is getting out to people and how to combat that.
I don't know that I can solve that problem.
I hope I'm wrong, but I do fear there's going to be some level of civil disorder, particularly if it's a close election. If it's a close election, I just have a terrible feeling that people are going to make a lot of noise. And I guess it might be at the state level though this time, as opposed to in Washington, based on what happened last time. So I don't know. It's just a nagging fear I have, and it's not just a matter of it's about trusting elections. But people don't trust each other. They don't trust institutions. They don't trust things that I thought we all took for granted. We no longer take for granted in this country. So I just feel like we're kind of we're almost in a uncharted water right now when it comes to elections. I mean, we've seen problems in the past, the 1960 election, the 2000 election, things got sorted out, and we made reforms after the 2000 election, the Help America Vote Act, you remember that? That was because of the hanging chads in Florida. We had to change the system around, and then we went to paperless ballots, and we thought that was a good idea. Then we said, well, no, we need a really paper backup later. That
back to paper.
Back to paper again. But we evolve in our thinking, but bottom line is, close election. I guess can't guarantee anything, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of noise, and I hope it just doesn't get violent.
I'm hopeful that the folks who address those sort of issues, and they all seem to be working together, and that they have a lot of success. I mean, civil unrest is obviously something we all want to avoid, but I hope that it does seem that folks are preparing for that and making the plans that they need to have in place to address those sort of things should they come up. I think folks are prepared for that.
Gentlemen, thank you both for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're staying?
Thank you, Lauren. You're not.
Good to see you guys.
Hi, everyone. We're ready for our last panel of the day as we get situated.
I sit here?
Sure.
I got the full off.
When we started the conversation earlier today, Dean Alexander asked, what can we do? What can we do to combat these threats that we've just heard about? And so now we're going to talk about some solutions. And so we have, at the very end, we have Amy Janensky, who is the president and CEO of the Pepper Center for Public Service. Right here next to me, we have Carrie Levinson, who's also a fellow with the Pepper Center for Public Service. And of course, we just heard from Congressman Charlie Dent, who's the executive director and vice president of the Aspen Institute Congressional Program. He's also on the board of Keep Our Republic. And you also just heard from Andrew McGinley, who's the vice president of external affairs for Committee of 70. And I have to also say an alumnus of the Philadelphia Bar Association staff. So thank you to our panel, and we'll want to hear some positive things about how we can move forward.
Me. I want you to know that we had planned the first 6 or 7 minutes introducing everybody. That's been done, so we'll go move right on here.
My introduction will be very short compared to everyone
We've
else's.
heard today a lot of information. The speeches you gave were informative and sometimes even inspirational. Now what we want to talk about is what comes next, right? It's taking what we've heard today, what the ABA is calling its listening tour, and converting that into action. The task force, the ABA task force, calls this next steps. And that's what we have been involved with. What I'd like to do is start off by, Amy, if you could, what I'd like to do is say, where are we right now? Let me, before I do that, this has been an evolving project for us. Because when you start to think about what the next steps are, it becomes a little murky, particularly when you're talking about a county, you've heard it, a state that's divided into 67 counties, each is a bit different, and each is autonomous. And so when you start to think about next steps in Pennsylvania, it has to evolve. And as I said, it's a bit murky. But Amy, why don't you tell us a little bit about where we are in the process of developing the next steps?
Okay, so with all radical candor, we don't really know what all the next steps are. This is a developing project, and all of you are part of that project as well. In your material are 2 sheets. One is a volunteer form, and the other is asking you about your next step. It would be extremely helpful to us if you would fill those out and get them to us, because we're trying to figure out what the next steps are. But here's where we are. We heard this morning, we heard just now, about this attack on American democracy. And in order to do anything, we all need to band together. We need to be an army that's available to deal with whatever contingency arises. As lawyers, we can do a lot, but if we're by ourselves trying to do it, we're not going to get anywhere. So what we are going to try to do is to create a network, an army, from all of the counties, working through the zone governors of the Pennsylvania Bar Association to make contacts in the counties to try to grow the network so that we have a listserv, we have the ability to train volunteers. If you sign up for this or you get involved, it doesn't mean that you have to do what is being suggested. Everybody always has a right to say no. But unless we're ready, we're not going to be able to be effective. So what we need is your help in getting to wherever we're going. We worked in the last election, and we had no idea where we were going. And, but thanks to talking to people and asking questions and trying to figure out where there were holes in the process, we were able to, working with a bunch of people, come up with a bolstering of the election protection hotline, which ended up being something that we took over because nobody expected, in 2019, that you were going to have to rely upon this hotline to get people to the polls in Pennsylvania who had never voted in a pandemic, or to help them with mail-in ballots that they had never used before. And we ended up getting people there because we changed the hotline to have only volunteers who were trained on Pennsylvania law. And that made all the difference. And we helped thousands of people get to the polls. So we had no idea where we were going, and I'm not sure that we know exactly where we're going with creating this network of lawyers, but I'm sure it's going to be useful. And one area that has already been suggested to us is poll workers. So.
Oh, that's me? Yeah. So our CEO likes to say that you should do the next thing. So you're a voter, that's great. What's the next thing you can do? And one of the things that we really encourage folks to do, and lawyers especially, is to become a poll worker. It might not feel like the most exciting thing, but it really are. Poll workers are the essential workers of elections. They cannot happen without poll workers. And if you are lucky, and we're all lucky, it's a very boring day. But it's a very important day where you are literally making sure and protecting the right to vote for people in your community. It also can be a really interesting day when things go wrong. I've had the opportunity to be a poll worker and a poll watcher and a committee person, and all of those different roles really allow you to solve problems for people in the election. The reason lawyers are so good at it is because we are typically pretty good at addressing a situation calmly most of the time, and really applying the facts and the law to the situation, applying the law to the situation at hand to make sure people's right to vote is protected. So we really encourage lawyers to do it. There are always opportunities, and we have a couple of different resources to help you figure that out if you want to be a poll worker. First, we have poll worker information sessions online, which are run by a former elections administrator here in Pennsylvania, Jeff Greenberg. That is like a 101, right? It kind of tells you what a poll worker does and what it takes to do it. And it's a good opportunity for you to do it, to figure out if this is something you want to do. It could also be a supplemental training because you have to do official training through your county if you are serving as a poll worker. And we're rolling out some new poll worker trainings this year. One of the things we've been talking about is, unrest. So we are working on de-escalation training for poll workers, something that folks can do online to supplement the training already given by their county, but really get a lot of detail on how to handle those tough situations. Like on a personal level, I am not a lawyer who would be helpful in a courtroom on election day. That's just not who I am, right? But I feel like I've been able to help a lot of people vote over the years because I've been in the polls solving problems. I'm also someone who gets stressed about elections. The best way to not be stressed about the election is to be busy all day. So you can feel really good. And another, the hotline is such a good resource, and it's you can help so many people by just answering those calls and solving problems on the phone, and it makes you feel really good. All of these things will help alleviate some of that election stress that we all deal with. I really encourage you to, as we said, take that next step. Is it become a poll worker or a poll watcher? There's so many different opportunities to engage in that process.
We want to use the network to do poll workers, but as well to use skills of litigators and use all of our talents in a variety of ways that will be effective, and which will be not stepping on toes of anybody else and be necessary. So,
yeah, I think the biggest challenge to elections is the eroding election infrastructure in our country. where so many good people, you read about people who lead county election offices stepping down because of the threats and the pressure. I really worry that there are people who are trying to get into these jobs, who have a predetermined outcome in mind of an election. That's dangerous. When, like I said, I used to think these election administrators were all just clerks or administrators. They don't want problems. They want a clean election. They want to tally the votes and announce the winner. That's what they want to do, and so it gets back to this whole question of the poll workers, the poll watchers, and we need these people. These are the folks who make sure the whole system works, and we can't. And these are the types of people you would maybe want run an election office one day. With that experience, they know what it's like on the ground, and so we need to develop that infrastructure. And so anything we can do to help encourage ordinary people just to do their civic duty, and that's what they think they're doing. Those people who are working, they think they're just helping advance our democracy. They're just working. It's a very almost a charitable enterprise for them. I know they get paid a little bit, but it's a charitable enterprise, and they think they're doing their part, and they are. Yeah. And if a lot of Americans don't think it's worth their time or effort to do their part, if there's too much risk associated with too many threats, too much controversy, I mean the
system falls apart.
It falls apart fast, and so basically trying to get people to engage in this operation is critical.
And I know there is an effort from some folks in this room to get CLE credit for poll workers. That's an ongoing effort. I can't tell you, I can't break that news that that's been accomplished, but we're working on it.
Just want you to know, I was supposed to introduce each of them before they spoke. So it left me with very little to do. One thing I do want to say is this, that we've had an extensive discussion, both within our group in Pennsylvania, in the bar, and then with people from other states about exactly what would a next steps consist of. So what we're trying to do is put together a variety of activities that would be effective, useful, to try to carry out this concept of improving the election. Some of the things, just to give you an idea of some of the things we've been thinking about, but I want you to understand we're only thinking about these at the moment, is that this network that Amy referred to, one of the things that they could do is be prepared to litigate either same day, or post-election issues as they come up. As the Congressman said early on, there could be some questions that arise in the next election. And we're thinking that the next steps ought to be at least thinking about preparation to handle those kinds of things. And as I said earlier on, in Pennsylvania with 67 counties, each one autonomous, makes it a little bit challenging. The other issue that some of the other states are taking on in next steps is trying to find a way to use the network of lawyers to counter the disinformation that is just raging through the country. It's the kind of thing the Congressman was talking about, Andrew talked about, Amy has talked about. So those just to give you an idea, but we welcome any ideas, any thoughts you have about which could be, any kind of steps we could take would be effective. We'd welcome that information. We'd like to talk with you. So in the absence of that, if anybody have anything else you'd like to add or any questions for us?
We don't have cards to hand out.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before you leave, Charlie and Amy and Carrie and Andrew, I just want to say there's a quote that William Wilkinson said, and it said, "It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness." And I just want to say thank you to the Next Steps for lighting a candle, showing our problems, but more importantly, showing our solutions, and showing us here today how we have to prioritize this in our lives for the good of the country. And I pledge the help of the Pennsylvania Bar Association in that effort. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank all of our speakers, especially those who've traveled from far distances, for being here today to speak and to provide your wisdom and your insight on these really critically important issues to our democracy. We're particularly grateful to ABA President Mary Smith for choosing Pennsylvania and especially Philadelphia which is obviously the birthplace of our country, to conduct this part of our listening tour on democracy, especially on Law Day. This was an amazing, incredibly informational and insightful discussion. However, as we just heard, this is just a first step. You just heard from our panel talking about how we can contribute and how we can move the needle forward to partner with the ABA, the Pennsylvania Bar, and the Philadelphia Bar Association, along with the Pepper Center, Committee of 70, and Keep Our Republic. But we do need your help, and we're hopeful that you will pledge to continue this work to make sure that we can have free and fair elections where everyone's voice is heard.
We began today with a story about Ben Franklin, and it ended where he was saying something 6 blocks from here and about keeping our republic. Today I thought about him walking through time and walking another 6 blocks over to here, 237 years from 1787. And whether he walked into here today and he looked and he saw what happened here today, and I think he would be smiling on us. And I think he would say to himself and say to all of us, thank you for keeping the republic. And thank you all for being here and being ambassadors of democracy. And I know we will all fight to keep the republic and to keep this great country strong. Thank you all on behalf of the Pennsylvania Bar Association.
Well, thanks everyone. What a day. We heard from so many great speakers. I know myself, I am really energized about preserving our democracy. Thank you so much all for being here today. Thank you so much to the Pennsylvania Bar, the Philadelphia Bar, the Pepper Center, all our speakers. And there's like 3 people who were behind the scenes because this stuff doesn't happen magically. I want to thank Elizabeth Yang, Frank Valdez, and Jacob Roush. And as they said, I am really energized about what we heard today, and I will think about a famous Ben Franklin quote. When after they drafted the documents, they asked him, "What kind of government have you given us?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." And so by being here today, we're on the step to doing that. I know you got these forms. Please fill them out, because this day is not just for this day. This day is leading up to the election, and more importantly, after the election. So whether you want to be a poll worker, we have poll worker-esque at ABA. I know you have places in Pennsylvania where you can do that, but we have that. And there's lots to do, so let's roll up our sleeves. And before we do that, though, the best, announcement today, we are having a reception in the Delegates Cafe on the first floor, so I'll see you all down there, and please fill out your forms. Thank you, everyone.